All right, I've got 2:30. I appreciate those of you who are here on time. And excuse me, and today's meeting should be relatively quick because typically at this meeting we talk a great deal about reporting requirements that are due in the summer, and at this point we don't know when those data elements will be due or how we're going to gather them. So we have some placeholders as far as the meeting today is concerned. We are going to talk about some quick reminders, annual reviews, disciplining students with disabilities, referrals, what we know about the summer reporting calendar at this point, some other summer plannings, and then just a few reminders in general. Let's talk for a moment about annual reviews. I know that some of you have been doing these all along. Others are beginning to do all of yours, those of you who have chosen to do all of your annual reviews in the spring. But just a reminder that what a typical annual review that is a standalone annual review looks like, you're going to review the progress from the previous IEP with all of those annual goals, but particularly for the last 9 weeks or the last progress monitoring reporting period. And so that's what you're going to report out for that 14-15 IEP, and that progress report will close out that student's progress on that IEP. You're going to determine whether or not the goals in that IEP have been met, and then move into a discussion about where the student is presently performing, academic achievement and functional performance, functional behavior, and you're going to then discuss the annual goals that are aligned to these present levels and the services, including accommodations for the 15-16 IEP. If you're doing an annual review in conjunction with a reevaluation, either and in this case a typical 3-year reevaluation, you're going to begin that meeting by reviewing existing data for the reevaluation planning portion, and this includes the review of progress toward annual goals on the 14-15 IEP and a discussion of any other existing or new information you have on that student. You're going to determine whether the annual goals from that 14-15 IEP have been met, and then determine continued eligibility and need for special ed, which closes out the reevaluation portion, and then move into your discussion of present levels and functional behavior, that kind of a summary, and the discussion of annual goals and services for the 15-16 IEP. If you're using, just a reminder, if you're using curriculum-based measurement to write your annual goals, make sure that you're using several data points and not just one. You would not write an annual goal based on only one CBM. So you should not be giving a 4th grade curriculum-based measurement, have the student reading one passage at the 4th grade level, and then writing an annual goal based on that one data point. You should be using your progress monitoring data that you've been gathering through CBMs and other methods, so that your findings and present levels reflect a year's worth of data and progress. For the particular annual goal that you're looking at, you would give at least 3 measures and take the average or median score. In other words, if the student's working on a 4th grade reading passage, you would have the student read 4 different 4th grade reading passages and take the average or median score in order to write that annual goal. But again, don't write an annual goal based on one data measure or data point. It needs to be a combination, and best practice would say 3 measures. A quick reminder for discipline, because this is the point in the year when we have a lot of questions about discipline, and I would encourage you that if you are encountering an issue with a student that's looks like it may take you over the 10 days, or an issue in which you need to develop a behavior intervention plan after you do a functional behavior assessment through reeval, then contact your district coordinator to help guide you through that process. Students with IEPs have 10 free days. That's the way we term it. So you can suspend a student with an IEP for an offense in your student handbook that is suspendable for 10 days, just like you would any other student without a disability. And that's 10 days within a whole school year. So that's 10 cumulative days. You need to kind of look at those 10 days to help you. The closer you get to the 10 days, the more you need to be looking at your IEP to determine whether or not it's appropriate, whether or not there needs to be a behavior intervention plan developed, those kinds of things to address those behavioral needs. A good rule of thumb is that if the student's got 6 or more out-of-school suspension days, then an IEP meeting should be held. All of your school level policies and procedures contain a description of how you're going to measure and track those out-of-school suspension days. They should not sneak up on you. You will not have had your school level policies and procedures approved unless you had an appropriate method of tracking those out-of-school suspension days. So watch those very carefully. Again, be familiar with your school student handbook concerning discipline, suspension, and expulsion, because each one of our schools handles that differently. Make sure you're aware of what suspendable offenses are, and just for general knowledge, what your school's expulsion procedures are. Please remember that any time you change a student's placement, anytime you remove him from the setting in which he is typically participating for a disciplinary reason, that is a suspension. And it doesn't matter whether you call it an administrative leave, whether you call it the principal just called his mom to come and get him early, or what you call it. It is a suspension, and it has to be counted that way. There's no such thing as a student misbehaving and the principal picking up the phone and calling mom and saying, you need to come get him today. That's a suspension. You have removed him from the setting in which he typically receives instruction for a disciplinary reason. And you have to track those kinds of disciplinary removals. In-school suspension counts as an out-of-school suspension if the student is not provided with access to coursework and to the special ed teacher support and supervision and instruction. If you have an in-school suspension program that allows the student to continue to work on general ed curriculum and he still has access to his special ed services, then that is not counted as an out-of-school suspension. Again, make sure you're familiar with your school's student handbook concerning what is a suspendable offense and how expulsion works in your school. And make sure that you look again at what your school level policies and procedures say about tracking out-of-school suspension days. And we're going to talk about tracking suspensions both in school and out of school in a few minutes when we talk about Table 5, the discipline data. Once a student has been suspended out of school for 10 days in a school year, you have to have a manifestation determination each and every time he does something else that might warrant a suspension. That manifestation determination meeting is the IEP team that determines whether or not the behavior that led to that most recent suspension is a direct result of the student's disability or a direct result of the school's failure to implement the IEP. Anytime after those 10 days, a student is suspended again, the IEP team has to determine what kinds of services that student would need that would enable him to continue to participate in the general ed curriculum, although in another setting, and progress toward meeting his annual goals. If you get to the point where a student is going to be suspended for more than the 10 days, for example, if a student has been suspended out of school for 9 days and he does something else that is suspendable, and now we'll have an additional 3 days which will put him over that 10-day mark, you would be well advised to contact your district special ed coordinator to help to get that to get her to walk you through the process of the manifestation determination and what that looks like and what that entails. Suspensions have to, in school and out of school, have to be logged into PowerSchool in a timely fashion. At some point in early June, you're going to be required to report through Table 5 the discipline data for PowerSchool. Last year was the first year that those data were pulled directly from PowerSchool, and it was some schools had a very difficult time with this. Your PowerSchool person has received training and will continue to receive training from Zenobia in how to enter those data. This is not something you can wait until the end of the year to enter. There's just too much of it too many times. So it's critical that you're talking with and coordinating with your PowerSchool person to make sure that all discipline incidents, especially those that are related to in-school suspensions and out-of-school suspensions, are entered into PowerSchool correctly. And you do have to account for partial days. A reminder with referrals. There is no summer cutoff for submitting referral packets. If you receive a referral at the end of the school year, say on May 30th, you've got to schedule an evaluation planning meeting within a reasonable amount of time from when that parent request for testing or the SIT team referral occurs. You've got to then conduct the evaluation and determine eligibility, even if this means calling staff back in during the summer. So even if you got a referral from a parent request for testing, the last day of school, you've got to, if you have reason to suspect the child may have a disability, you've got to schedule that go ahead and schedule that evaluation planning meeting. You cannot wait until school starts in August. Please be aware of the phrase scheduling the evaluation planning meeting within a reasonable time from either the time that the parent requests the evaluation or the time when the SIT team, the RTI team, your intervention team refers the student on for evaluation. At this point, as a district, we have not defined that reasonable time for schools in general. The average time in looking at what other districts and other states are doing that have defined this time period seems to range from about 20 school days from the time the parent requests the evaluation or the time the SIT team refers for evaluation to about 30 calendar days. Please be conscious and aware of that time period. Don't make us define it for you as a district. We have one school that, because of a state complaint from a parent about the fact, about the time it took from when she initially requested an evaluation to when the school actually convened the evaluation planning meeting, there was a state complaint that was filed and findings made against the school because the school did not convene that evaluation planning meeting in a reasonable amount of time. What the law says is that once a parent makes a request for an evaluation, or once the intervention team makes the referral for evaluation, the school has to either conduct the evaluation planning meeting and get consent to evaluate if that's appropriate, or issue a prior written notice to the parent detailing why you are refusing to evaluate within a reasonable time. In this particular situation, the parent very clearly made the request for evaluation in July, and the school did not convene the evaluation planning team meeting until late November, and that's not a reasonable amount of time in anybody's book. So be very aware of the time between when a parent requests an evaluation and when your SIT team makes the referral for evaluation, and make sure that you are moving toward an evaluation planning meeting in a reasonable amount of time. And right now, most schools in the district have not been required to track that time frame, but if we are made aware either from a parent complaint or in an on-site folder review or through other means that the school is struggling with that, then you will have to start tracking and turning in this information. And this really should be something that you're doing for best practice anyway. So just please be very aware of that timeline between when the parent requests, and we talked last month about the keywords to listen for in communication with parents. I think my child may have a disability. The doctor has diagnosed my child with. I want my child tested. Those kinds of phrases, and make sure that your teaching staff and school leadership understands their responsibility when they hear those kinds of phrases from parents in following your child find and referral process as quickly as possible. Summer data reporting is going to be short and sweet. These are the data that are required reporting from schools during the summer, either right toward the end of school or through the 1st of July. We have told schools from the beginning and reminded you frequently that these data reports are due, and the school has to make arrangements to make sure that these data are submitted and are available. So if you are a school special ed coordinator who does not work during the summer, you need to make sure that these data are available and can be and will be sent upon request to the district, who then has to turn around and report these same data to the state. And we'll talk about each one of these in a little bit more detail. I will tell you that this chart, these are tentative dates based on when we had to turn things in last year. We do not have dates for data submission from the State Department at this point. We also don't know how we're going to be reporting these data this year from the State Department. Last year in Accent, there were, for several of these, there were reports that we could run that would provide these data, and then we spent a couple of weeks helping you clean up the data before it was reported to the Department of Ed. At this point, the Department of Ed has not developed the reports to pull these data from Enrich. So we're going to be working with an outside consultant to try to develop some reports ourselves that will help us start to look at these data to clean them up. But again, at this point, these are very tentative dates based on last year's reporting calendar, and we will let you know as soon as we know when these data are due and how they will need to be reported. There has to be someone at the school who's knowledgeable about these data, can answer questions, and make corrections upon request. Again, these are reporting requirements from the state. The state has reporting deadlines because they have to turn around and report these data up to the feds. So make sure that you've discussed with your school leader how this summer data reporting will be carried out at the school level. Indicator 11, you'll hear us talk about a great deal. It's the 60-day timeline. In other words, it's tracking from the time the parent consent to evaluate is received up through the completion of the evaluation and then eligibility determination. At this point, we don't know how the Office of Special Education Services will pull these data. When we've asked, they say that they are still developing the report. So we're trying to work with an outside consultant to develop some type of compliance check that will help us with this. Go ahead and start looking at Enrich to verify that your dates are correct. You're looking for to make sure that in Enrich you've entered the date the signed consent to evaluate was received, and these are only for new evaluations. Only for new evaluations. The date the evaluation was completed, go back and refer to the PowerPoints from the beginning of the year to see how that's defined, but it's the point at which all of your new information has been gathered and scored and interpreted. And then make sure that your date that eligibility was determined is entered correctly into Enrich. It may be helpful. We have not required it of all schools, but it may be helpful to keep a spreadsheet with these dates and this information, and I know that some of you already do this. So you're looking at the date the signed consent to evaluate was received by the school, the date the evaluation was completed, and the date eligibility was determined for the 60-day timeline. For the 60-day timeline, anytime you go over the 60-day timeline, you have to enter into Enrich the reason you went over the timeline, and you need to be specific. If it was, for example, if it's a virtual student and the parent kept canceling or rescheduling evaluations, you've got to have multiple attempts, not just a couple, but multiple, weekly almost, attempts to reschedule with that parent during that 60 days. But you need to be very specific about your documentation as to why you went over. The other thing that, of course, if you went over the 60 days for any student for initial evaluation, you should have held a possible denial of FAPE meeting if the student was eligible, and discuss the need for compensatory services. That documentation also needs to be entered into Enrich in that compliance check box that pops up when you're over your 60-day. And in that case, you would have an explanation as to why you went over. You would have the date that you held your denial of FAPE discussion, and you would have the outcome of that discussion. The team determined the student did not need compensatory services because of ABC, or the team determined the student did need compensatory services. But all of that would need to be documented in Enrich very fully. COSEF is the Childhood Outcome Summary Form. And it's the percent of preschool children with IEPs who demonstrate improved outcomes in the areas of positive social emotional skills, acquisition and use of knowledge and skills, which is language, communication, early literacy, and the use of appropriate behaviors to meet their needs, adaptive behavior skills. So for any schools that are serving children ages 3 through 5, you should have already started entering entry date, and for any child that turns 6 during the school year, exit data for those students. So for every child that's served by us for at least 6 months before they turn 6 years old, there has to be an entrance and an exit COSEF completed. Sorry about the typo. Within the next few weeks, we'll be following up with the specific schools that are serving students that are this age, so you can begin verifying your data. And on the bookshelf under resources, there are, I think, 5 or 6 different COSEF resources. There's a training PowerPoint, there's a decision tree to help you make the decisions for the outcomes, and a sample form. But look at the resources under the bookshelf, and we will probably be doing a webinar at some point once we know how this is going to work and enrich, specific for the schools that have children that are serving children 3 through age 6 or through age 5, please. Extended school year. Eligibility has to be discussed at least annually. We've recommended and asked that you make this decision at annual review regardless of when the annual review occurs, because remember, extended school year is not just about summer services. It's not just about the summer break. It's about any break in the routine of instruction. So you're going to make your annual review, your ESY decisions at your annual review, even if your annual review's not in May. And you're going to consider things like regression of skills, how quickly the student can recoup skills that he's lost or has kind of backslid in after breaks in instruction, emerging skills, interfering behaviors, transitions that might occur, or special circumstances. And then you're looking at the data that you use to make these decisions. For any student who will, and also there's a great deal of information on the bookshelf about ESY that will help you in making those decisions. And with ESY, the new Enrich IEP process helps guide you through this process. For any student whose team determines they're going to need ESY services, begin looking and gathering that information. You're going to need to send it to us toward the end of May, and Kendall will be sending out a reporting template as soon as we get it. The purpose of reporting the names of these students is for potential additional funding. Don't get excited. Although we pass on every bit of the money for ESY that comes from the state, historically it's only been about $250 per student, and we've not had a lot of students who have been determined eligible for ESY. On the bookshelf, as part of the ESY information, there's a good comparison of how ESY differs from summer school. Table 5 is discipline. Again, it will be pulled from PowerSchool. It has to be accurate. We'll send out more information just as soon as we can. That reporting year is incorrect. That was actually 3 years ago, but that gives you an idea of about when it has been due in the past. The data are pulled from PowerSchool. It is critical that your PowerSchool person be entering these data correctly. Exiting, age outs. Each of you in your policies and procedures chose whether you were going to serve students to age 21 or through age 21. So when we refer to age out, we're talking about those students who, depending on what your school has chosen to serve, the age-out students are either those that are turning 21 and will no longer be eligible for services, or through 21, again, depending on what your school has chosen. With seniors, there is information on the bookshelf For specific end-of-the-year instructions, you do have to complete a summary of performance for these students. There is a sample and directions on the bookshelf. And the summary of performance is the summary of what kinds of services the student has been receiving and it focuses more on accommodations that might be necessary as the student makes the transition from high school to whatever he's going to do from that point on. The right to an IEP and a free appropriate public education ends for students when they either graduate with a regular high school diploma or age out, 21 or through 21. And so it's critical to look at those students who are going to graduate with a regular high school diploma and then for students who are aging out. This comes up, and just as a reminder, the feds have been very clear to say that a school is not responsible for conducting a full reevaluation, meaning additional testing, on the basis just to meet a requirement from another agency. For example, sometimes you will have a parent come in and say, the university my child has applied to requires that he have a current cognitive measure or a current testing in order for them to provide accommodations through 504. That's not your responsibility to do. The only time you're required to conduct a reevaluation or further testing as part of a reevaluation is when the team needs additional information to make your reevaluation decisions. So you certainly can agree to conduct further testing, or you could, out of the goodness of your heart, if that's what you want to do, but you are not required to do that. And if this comes up with anybody, just contact your district coordinator or me, and we'll walk you through that as a reminder. Aging out, remember that 21, depending on your particular school, would age out. It will either be to 21 or through 21. If you are unsure, check your school level policies and procedures, because you did have to specify in there which. And these students also must have a summary of performance. If you've got a student who is not going to graduate with a regular diploma and is not 21, doesn't meet the age out requirement, and he's eligible to return for the next school year, you have to develop an IEP that would be ready for the student on the first day of school, even if the student and parent look you dead in the eye and say, he's not coming back, he's dropping out, or he's not coming back. So make sure that for those 19-year-olds who just haven't quite earned enough credits, but even if the student tells you, I'm not coming back, you're still required to go ahead and develop an IEP so that it would be in place if the student over the summer changes his mind. And this situation sort of came up, I think, recently in one of our schools with a student who last year looked as if he were going to graduate with a regular high school diploma. He lacked one course. He was actually enrolled in that course and for whatever reason dropped out just prior to finishing that course. He was 19, so he was eligible to come back, but instead of doing an IEP so that it would be in place the next year when he decided to come back, the school did not. And so he was not able to start the school year when he changed his mind during the summer about returning, when she changed her mind. And so the school had to scramble around and discuss the possible denial of FAPE because there was not an IEP in place to start the school year the first day. So watch that. I'm not coming back. Unless the student you are sure the student has graduated with a regular high school diploma or is aging out, then you'll need to develop an IEP for the next year. In this case, we've got some students in our schools, virtual and brick and mortar, whose parent may say, I'm not enrolling him again for next year. It's still your obligation to develop the IEP for that student now, because the parent could change his or her mind. Summer planning, again, start the conversation with your school leader now about how the summer dating requirements will be handled. We will start trainings for next year again in late July for both new and returning coordinators. We anticipate at this point having 2 new schools added to the district next year. And then there may be, we know that there's always some turnover in existing school coordinators, but we will have trainings that will begin again in late July and into August, similar to what we had this year, and we will get that training calendar out to you hopefully by mid-May so that you can make plans. And I see that Carrie asked a question about which one summary performance to use. I need to look to see what's on the bookshelf, Carrie, and I'll take off. I thought that there were directions for summary performance, and then there was an Adobe summary performance to use as kind of a template. And I will be honest, I'm going to have to check in Enrich and see what things look like in Enrich. If there's a summary performance in Enrich within the next week or so, I'll develop directions for how to do that, like a cheat sheet like we've done for everything else. But I thought what was on the bookshelf was kind of the directions and walkthrough on just a typical summary performance, and then the Adobe form that we actually used last year. But I will look to make sure. And again, if we're doing this through Enrich, and I apologize for not checking on that sooner, there is one, and thank you, Floyd. So I'll develop a cheat sheet for use of the one in Enrich and put that on the bookshelf and send it out via email as well. And hopefully it may be fairly straightforward and we may not need a lot of directions. Quick reminders, please make sure you're uploading the required documents in Enrich. Several times recently, based on parent calls or other things that have happened, I've gone into Enrich to try to look at something, and am very concerned about the signature pages that are not uploaded, signed consents, transfer IEPs from the previous district, and if you did any initial evaluations or reevaluations prior to the December updates, then you need to have uploaded your completed, which means signed, evaluation report or your signed reevaluation report, making sure that all of the required components are there. So please make sure you're uploading all of the required documents into Enrich and that they're associated with the correct things. For example, make sure that you're in the IEP when you're uploading the signature page for the IEP. And especially any evaluations or reevaluations that were completed prior to December. We are going to start spot checking this type of thing. So make sure that you're getting all of that, and the transfer IEPs from previous school districts, make sure that those are uploaded as well. Make sure that if you have a change in a meeting date, time, or purpose, that you're logging information into the parent contacts in Enrich about why the meeting date was changed and the fact that it was. In looking at a couple of at different schools and looking at meeting notices, I've seen too many that there's a meeting notice for a date and then nothing at all associated with that date else in Enrich. So it's as if a meeting notice was created and then the meeting didn't happen, but there's no explanation at all anywhere as to why that meeting didn't happen. So please make sure that when there is a change in meeting date and even meeting time or purpose, that you are logging that into the parent contact log in Enrich. Our next meeting will be May 11th, and hopefully by that time we will have a lot more information about summer reporting. The 10 o'clock optional professional development that morning will be how to work with outside service providers, and many, if not most of you, do work with outside contracted service providers, whether that's speech therapists, OTs, PTs, outside counselors providing counseling or therapy for IEPs, and just different service providers of this nature. And this is going to be looking at it from both the outside service provider point of view, what kinds of things an outside service provider might need to know from you, as well as from the school's point of view, what kinds of things you want your outside service provider to know. We've had several situations where the outside service provider, whether it's a speech therapist, an occupational therapist, physical therapist, or whoever it is, might be coming from a clinical or medical model, and the school will say, we'll hear the school person say, you know, this is what you need to be doing, and the outside service provider says, that's not how we do things. So in working with those outside providers to help them understand they are now in an educational setting, and we do have different requirements than a medical model. Our present levels and findings may look different, our annual goals, the way we log services, all of this may be different than what they're used to. And then the afternoon's topics hopefully will be much more specific information about our summer reporting requirements. So unless there are any questions, I was checking the chat log. That is it for today. I appreciate all the hard work that everybody's putting in. Closing out this year with Enrich is going to be interesting, to say the least, and we will see how that goes. And again, the district coordinators and I are going to be working with an outside consultant in a couple of weeks to see if we can develop some reports that will be more useful to us. I will say, if you have requests or suggestions for reports that would be useful to you as a school, please email those to me in the next couple of weeks, and we'll certainly see what we can work out. Our major focus is going to be on things like pulling reevaluations that are due, overdue, initial evaluations to look at the 60-day timeline, progress monitoring, reports to show whether or not progress reports have been issued according to the IEP, and those kinds of things. So I'm going to hang around for a moment more, and we'll try to unmute everybody. And I appreciate everybody's time.
Becky?
Yes.
Hey, it's Becky Barnhill.
Hi.
I'm sorry I was late. We lost the internet, and I couldn't get the internet to go, so that's why I was a few minutes late. I apologize.
That's okay.
All right, thank you.
Uh-huh.